My name is Dania, and I just turned 32 years old. As an art restoration specialist, I spend my days breathing life back into forgotten masterpieces. 2 years ago, I met James, who proposed with a uniquely beautiful ring that meant the world to me. My sister Amanda has always found ways to diminish my achievements, but I never expected she would publicly humiliate me by calling my engagement ring fake at our family gathering. What she didn't know was that my quiet, private fiancé had secrets of his own, and her cruel mockery would backfire in the most spectacular way imaginable. If you've ever had a family member try to diminish your happiness, let me know where you're watching from, and subscribe to join me on this journey of sweet justice. I've always been passionate about art. Even as a child, I would spend hours in my room recreating famous paintings with whatever supplies I could find. That passion eventually led me to become an art restoration specialist at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Getting there wasn't easy, though. I worked 3 jobs simultaneously to put myself through college, earning my art history degree with a specialization in conservation techniques. End of .com 40A. My life has always been modest but fulfilling. I live in a small, 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn that I've lovingly decorated with vintage finds and a few carefully chosen art prints. It's not luxurious, but it's mine, and I've worked hard for every square foot of it. My sister Amanda, however, has always had different priorities. Since we were children, she positioned herself as the sophisticated, ambitious one in the family. While I was painstakingly cleaning ancient canvases with tiny cotton swabs, she was climbing the corporate ladder at a mid-tier fashion company, eventually landing a position as marketing executive. Amanda's Instagram account is a carefully curated showcase of luxury handbags, champagne brunches, and Fashion Week invitations. She has 15,000 followers who believe she lives the most glamorous life imaginable. What they don't see is how calculated each post is, how many takes it requires to get the perfect shot, or how often she stretches the truth about her connections. Playing with paintbrushes all day must be so relaxing, she once said during a family dinner, dismissing my 60-hour work weeks and the years of specialized training I'd completed. It's almost like having a hobby instead of a real career. When I finally saved enough for a down payment on my apartment, her response was to call it quaint, which in Amanda speak translates to embarrassingly small. She asked loudly if I'd considered getting a real job so I could live like an adult. Each achievement in my life has been met with similar backhanded compliments from Amanda. My promotion to senior specialist was so cute. My published paper on Renaissance pigment preservation techniques was a nice little article. Meanwhile, every designer purchase she made was presented as a major life milestone deserving of family congratulations. I met James 2 years ago at a museum fundraiser. I wasn't there as a guest, but working behind the scenes, restoring an ornate gold frame that had been damaged during transport. James mistook me for another guest when he wandered into the preparation area, looking for the restroom. "I'm so sorry," he said, realizing his mistake. "I didn't mean to interrupt your work." Instead of just leaving, he stayed to watch me apply gold leaf to the damaged corner of the frame. Unlike most people who quickly grew bored watching the painstaking process, James seemed genuinely fascinated. "The way you handle that is incredible," he said. "It's rare to see someone with such steady hands and patience." We talked for nearly an hour about the importance of craftsmanship in a world of mass production. James understood the value of things made with care and attention, regardless of their monetary worth. He asked intelligent questions about my techniques and listened attentively to my explanations. When the event coordinator finally found us, she seemed surprised to see James in the preparation area. Later, I learned from a colleague that James was actually one of the biggest donors to the museum's restoration department. Our first official date was at a small Italian restaurant in the West Village. James arrived in a simple button-down shirt and well-worn jeans. His watch was nice, but not flashy. If I hadn't known he was a major donor, I would have assumed he worked in academia, or perhaps as a skilled tradesman. He had calloused hands that spoke of someone who worked with them regularly. As our relationship developed, I noticed certain things about James that raised questions. He traveled frequently for business, often internationally. He never used car services, but instead drove himself in a reliable but unassuming sedan. His apartment was in a secure building with excellent views, but he didn't display any obvious signs of wealth. No designer furniture, no flashy electronics, no status symbols. When I asked about his work, he would smile and say he was in product development and manufacturing. He never mentioned specific clients or projects. At first, I wondered if he was being deliberately secretive, but over time I realized he simply didn't define himself by his career. He was more interested in discussing books we'd read or exhibitions we'd visited than talking about business. What I loved most about James was that he valued me for exactly who I was. He found my passion for art restoration fascinating rather than boring. He never suggested I should find a more lucrative career or move to a bigger apartment. He appreciated my knowledge and skills without trying to compete with or diminish them. After a year of dating, James became a fixed presence in my life. He kept a toothbrush at my place, knew how I liked my coffee, and could name every specialized tool in my home restoration kit. He understood my need for quiet concentration when I brought work home and never complained when I spent weekends hunched over a particularly challenging project. I never felt the need to introduce James to Amanda. Somehow, I knew she would find a way to make me feel inferior about this relationship too. She would either imply he wasn't successful enough, or suggest that he was only with me out of pity. Either way, I wanted to protect what we had from her judgment for as long as possible. But as our second anniversary approached, I could feel something shifting between us. James began asking more questions about my family, particularly about our upcoming annual gathering at my parents' home. He seemed nervous in a way I'd never seen before, and I caught him staring at me with an unreadable expression when he thought I wasn't looking. I should have known something big was coming, but I was too caught up in my own work to see the signs. The most beautiful surprises, after all, are often the ones we don't see coming. The proposal came on an ordinary Tuesday evening in April. James had arranged for us to have private access to one of the smaller viewing rooms at the museum after hours, supposedly to examine a newly acquired Renaissance miniature that my department would be restoring. When I arrived at the designated room, I found James standing next to an easel draped with a velvet cloth. The lighting was perfect, soft and warm, highlighting the ornate molding of the ceiling. "I have something special I'd like your expert opinion on," he said, his voice slightly unsteady. When he removed the cloth, I saw a small painting in an elaborate gold frame, similar to the one I had been repairing when we first met. The painting itself was a beautiful portrait of a couple in historical dress, but what caught my eye was the frame. Specifically, a small compartment built into the bottom edge that was slightly ajar. "This frame has a unique feature," James explained. "It was designed to hide secret messages between lovers in the 18th century. As I leaned in to examine the craftsmanship of this hidden compartment, I noticed something glinting inside. Before I could reach for it, James carefully removed a small velvet box from the compartment and lowered himself to one knee. "Dania," he said, his eyes meeting mine, "you've taught me to appreciate the beauty in things that others might overlook. You see value in what lies beneath the surface, in the history and craftsmanship rather than just appearance. That's how I feel about you, about us. There's something profound in what we've built together. Something that grows more valuable with each passing day." He opened the box to reveal a ring unlike any I had ever seen. It featured a vintage rose gold setting with intricate metalwork surrounding a center stone that caught the light in a mesmerizing way. It wasn't a typical diamond engagement ring, but something far more interesting and unique. "This ring is from a heritage collection," James explained. "Like you, it's worth far more than appears at first glance. Will you marry me, Dania?" Tears blurred my vision as I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When he slipped the ring onto my finger, it fit perfectly, as if it had been made specifically for me. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," I finally managed to say. "It feels like it has a story." James smiled. "It does. One day I'll tell you all about it." That night, as we celebrated with champagne at my apartment, I couldn't stop staring at my ring. In certain lights, the center stone appeared almost translucent. In others, it held depths of color I couldn't name. The metalwork around it was clearly done by hand, each tiny detail perfect in its execution. "Is this an antique?" I asked, wondering about its history. "In a way," James replied cryptically. It's from a very limited collection. There are fewer than 10 rings like this in existence. I didn't press him further, assuming he'd tell me more when he was ready. Instead, I focused on how the ring made me feel. Treasured. Special. Seen for who I truly was. All the things I had always wanted, but rarely experienced, especially with my family. The thought of my family, particularly Amanda, seeing this ring filled me with anxiety. It wasn't a traditional engagement ring with a huge diamond at its center. It was subtle, unusual, beautiful to those who understood craftsmanship, but perhaps not impressive to someone like my sister, who measured worth solely in terms of brand names and price tags. My mother called the next day after I texted her the news. "That's wonderful, honey," she said. Her voice warm but curious. "So, tell me about the ring. How many carats? Did James get it from Tiffany's?" I tried to explain that the ring was unique, that its value lay in its craftsmanship and rarity, rather than in meeting some standard benchmark for engagement rings. "Well, as long as you like it," my mother said, in the same tone she used when I showed her my first apartment. Amanda's boyfriend got her that gorgeous tennis bracelet for their 6-month anniversary. You know, the one with the VVS diamonds? Cost him $9,000. I felt my stomach tighten. Of course, Amanda's boyfriend's gift would be brought into the conversation. I hadn't even met this boyfriend yet, but I already knew he would be paraded as some sort of trophy, just like everything else in Amanda's life. My best friend Julia came over later that week to see the ring and celebrate with me. After appropriate squealing and hugging, she examined the ring closely. "This is stunning," she said sincerely. "It's so you, Dania. Unique and sophisticated." Then she hesitated. "Have you shown it to your family yet?" I shook my head. "Just sent a photo to my mom. We're announcing it officially at the annual family gathering next weekend." Julia winced slightly. "Amanda's going to be there, right?" "Unfortunately." "Just prepare yourself," Julia said gently. "You know how she can be. She might not appreciate how special this is." "I know," I sighed, "but I can't avoid her forever. Besides, James will be there with me this time." "Has James met any of your family yet?" "No. I've been keeping those worlds separate for as long as possible," I admitted. "Well, at least he'll get the full experience all at once," Julia said, trying to lighten the mood. Trial by fire. The week before the family gathering, I found myself unusually anxious. I kept taking the ring off to clean it, worried it would somehow look diminished next to Amanda's collection of designer jewelry. James noticed my unease and finally asked what was bothering me. When I explained my concerns about my family's reaction, particularly Amanda's, he smiled. "Maybe it's time I told them what I actually do," he said thoughtfully. "Would that make it easier for you?" I looked at him in surprise. "You mean about your business? I thought you preferred keeping that private." "I do," he admitted. "But I don't want you feeling uncomfortable because of me. Perhaps it's time to be more open, at least with your family." The night before the gathering, I could barely sleep. I tried to prepare myself for Amanda's inevitable criticism, rehearsing responses in my head. James seemed remarkably calm as we drove to my parents' suburban home the next day, even as my stomach twisted with anticipation. "Whatever happens," he said, squeezing my hand as we pulled into the driveway, "remember that I love you for exactly who you are. Nothing anyone says can change that." I took a deep breath, drawing strength from his words. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe for once, something I valued would be respected by my family. With that hope, we walked to the front door, my unique engagement ring catching the spring sunlight. My parents' home in Connecticut had recently undergone what my mother called a modest update, though the imported marble countertops and custom cabinetry suggested otherwise. As James and I entered, I could see my father already showing off the new wet bar to my uncles, while my mother directed the caterers in the dining room. These annual family gatherings had always been opportunities for subtle competition. Who had the most impressive job promotion, whose children had gotten into the most prestigious schools, who had vacationed in the most exclusive locations. I usually flew under the radar at these events, content to help in the kitchen or chat with my younger cousins about their college experiences. But today would be different. Today I had news to share and James by my side. My announcement came after the initial round of greetings and drinks had been served. I cleared my throat nervously, clutching James's hand. "Everyone, I have some exciting news," I began. "This is James, and we're engaged." There was a moment of stunned silence before the congratulations began. My mother hurried over to hug me, my father shook James's hand vigorously, and my aunts clustered around, asking the usual questions about when and where the wedding would be. "Let's see the ring, darling," Aunt Patricia exclaimed, reaching for my hand. I extended my left hand, feeling a surge of pride as several relatives leaned in to look. The ring truly was beautiful, catching the light from the expensive new chandelier overhead. "It's very artistic," my mother said, her tone slightly uncertain. "Unusual design," my father added, squinting at it. "Is that a diamond?" Cousin Sarah asked, tilting her head. Before I could explain about the heritage collection and the craftsmanship, the front door burst open with a dramatic flourish. Amanda had arrived. My sister stood in the entryway like a model at the end of a runway, dressed in a sleek black designer dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Her hair was freshly highlighted, her makeup flawless, and around her wrist gleamed what I assumed was the famous tennis bracelet. "Sorry I'm late, everyone," she announced, not sounding sorry at all. The traffic from the city was absolutely insane. She air-kissed our mother, handed our father a bottle of expensive scotch, and made her way through the relatives, accepting compliments on her appearance with practiced modesty. When she finally reached me, her eyes immediately locked onto James, assessing him with a quick up-and-down glance. "So, this must be the mysterious boyfriend Mom mentioned," she said, extending her hand to James. "I'm Amanda, the sister who got the fashion sense in the family." "Actually," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "James is my fiancé. We're engaged." Amanda's perfectly shaped eyebrows shot up. "Engaged? Wow, that was fast." She turned back to James. "You must be very sure about our little Dania." "Completely sure," James replied with a warm smile, seemingly unfazed by her condescending tone. "Well then, let's see this ring I've been hearing about," Amanda said, reaching for my hand without waiting for permission. I reluctantly extended my hand, watching as Amanda's expression shifted from polite interest to poorly disguised judgment. "It's unique," she said, using the exact tone she used when describing my quaint apartment. "Thank you," I replied. "It's from a special heritage collection. The craftsmanship is extraordinary." Amanda brought my hand closer to her face, making a show of examining the ring from different angles. The room had gone quiet, everyone waiting for her assessment. My stomach clenched as I saw the gleam in her eye that always preceded her most cutting remarks. "Dan, I hate to tell you this," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "but there's no way this is real." My face flushed hot with embarrassment. "What are you talking about?" "This setting," she continued, tapping the metalwork with her manicured nail. "And this stone. It looks like a cheap prop from a costume department, like something from a TV show." I pulled my hand back, cradling it against my chest as if she'd wounded it. "That's not true. It's from a heritage collection. James told me there are fewer than 10 like it in existence." Amanda laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, honey, is that what he told you? 10 in existence? That's what they tell tourists buying authentic souvenirs too." From the corner of my eye, I could see Aunt Margaret trying to hide a snicker behind her wine glass. Cousin Taylor had her phone out, no doubt taking a photo for the family group chat. My mother wore an expression of embarrassed concern, while my father suddenly became very interested in examining the ice in his drink. "James," my mother said, clearly trying to salvage the situation, "what is it that you do for work again?" Before James could answer, Amanda jumped in. "Yes, James, do tell. What line of work allows you to find these rare heritage pieces that somehow look exactly like the costume jewelry they sell at the mall?" The room was uncomfortably quiet now. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the expensive hardwood flooring and vanish. James, however, remained remarkably composed. "I work in product development and manufacturing," he said simply. "Primarily luxury goods. How fascinating, Amanda replied, not bothering to hide her skepticism. Any brands we might recognize? Possibly, James said with a slight smile. I prefer to let the products speak for themselves. Like Danya's ring? Amanda shot back, triggering another round of poorly concealed laughter from various family members. Exactly like Danya's ring, James confirmed, his tone unchanged but something shifting in his eyes. My father, apparently deciding it was time to change the subject, cleared his throat loudly. James, have you had a chance to try the scotch Amanda brought? 18-year-old single malt. As the conversation reluctantly shifted to more neutral territory, I excused myself to the kitchen, needing a moment alone. I leaned against the counter, fighting back tears as I twisted the ring on my finger. For a brief, horrible moment, I wondered if Amanda could be right. Did I actually know what James did for a living? Had I been too trusting? I shook the thought away immediately. The ring was real. Our relationship was real. Amanda was just doing what she always did, finding ways to diminish anything that brought me joy. When I returned to the living room, James gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. The conversation had moved on, but throughout the dinner preparations, I could hear Amanda making little digs about cubic zirconia and faux gold whenever she passed near me. Each comment was like a needle, small but sharp, pricking at my confidence and happiness. By the time we all sat down for dinner, my joy about the engagement had been thoroughly overshadowed by humiliation. I picked at my food, unable to muster an appetite, while around me my family carried on as if nothing had happened. Amanda held court at her end of the table, regaling everyone with stories about her latest business trip to Milan. James remained attentive and polite beside me, but I could feel a new tension in him. His responses became more measured, his posture more formal. Something had changed, and I wasn't entirely sure what it meant. As dinner progressed, Amanda's conversation turned increasingly toward her expertise in luxury brands. She displayed her Elliston bracelet prominently, making sure everyone at the table noticed it glinting under the chandelier light. It's from their exclusive reserve collection, she explained to my aunt. They only make 75 each year, and you have to be on a special client list to even be offered one. It's beautiful, my mother gushed. That must have cost Gregory a fortune. Amanda smiled modestly. Well, you know Elliston. They're the pinnacle of luxury jewelry. Their craftsmanship is unmatched. I noticed James watching Amanda with increasing interest as she continued. I actually know several people at Elliston, she said, swirling her wine glass. Part of my job in marketing. I could introduce you sometime, Mom. Maybe get you on the preferred client list. Do you work directly with their design team? James asked suddenly. Amanda looked at him, surprised that he had joined the conversation. I've met several of their designers at industry events. They're very exclusive, very private about their process. Fascinating, James said. And you're certain you can tell authentic Elliston pieces from, what did you call it? Cheap props? I felt a flutter of nervousness at his tone. There was something beneath the politeness now, something sharp. Amanda didn't seem to notice. Of course, I've been around luxury brands my entire career. Take Danya's ring, for instance. Real Elliston work has certain hallmarks. The metalwork is distinctive. The settings have a particular style. That ring doesn't have any of those qualities. And you're an expert on Elliston's entire catalog? Including their heritage pieces? James pressed. Well, I wouldn't call myself an expert exactly, Amanda backtracked slightly, but I know enough to recognize quality when I see it. And with respect, James, that ring just doesn't have the markers of a genuine luxury piece. Just then, James's phone rang. He glanced at it, and his expression changed. I need to take this. Excuse me, he said, standing from the table and walking toward the patio doors. As soon as he was out of earshot, Amanda leaned across the table toward me. Danya, I'm saying this because I care about you. Have you actually verified what James does for a living? Of course I have, I lied, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. Because product development and manufacturing could mean anything, she continued. It's incredibly vague. And the way he dodged the question about recognizable brands? Red flag. He's private about his work, I defended. Not everyone needs to brag about their job. There's private, and then there's secretive. Amanda said, loud enough for others to hear. I'm just concerned he might not be who he says he is. I could see several relatives exchanging glances. My mother looked worried. My father uncomfortable. What exactly are you implying? I asked, my voice tight. I'm just saying maybe you should do some basic checking, Amanda replied. Google him. Look at his LinkedIn. Basic due diligence before you commit to marrying someone. I know everything I need to know, I insisted. Do you? Do you know which company he works for? Have you met any of his coworkers? Has he introduced you to his family? With each question, Amanda's voice grew more confident, more concerned, and I could see our relatives beginning to nod along with her. You're wearing what he claims is an extremely rare, valuable ring, Amanda continued. But it looks like something you'd get from a street vendor. Don't you think that's strange? You don't know what you're talking about, I said, but my voice wavered. I just don't want to see you taken advantage of, Amanda said, reaching across to pat my hand condescendingly. You've always been so trusting. Before I could respond, the patio door slid open and James returned. The conversation immediately shifted, everyone suddenly very interested in their dessert plates, but I could feel the damage had been done. Seeds of doubt had been planted around the table, with concerned looks being shot my way when they thought I wouldn't notice. James resumed his seat beside me, his expression unreadable. Everything okay? I whispered. It will be, he replied cryptically. Then, more loudly, he addressed the table. That was my team. They'll be joining us shortly. Your team? My father asked. What team? Some colleagues, James said simply. They were in the area and needed to consult with me on an urgent matter. I hope you don't mind the interruption. Of course not, my mother said, though she looked confused. Any friends of yours are welcome. Amanda raised her eyebrows at me across the table, as if to say, see? More vagueness. I ignored her, but inside I was just as confused. In 2 years, I had never met any of James's colleagues. Why would they be coming here, now? The conversation resumed its awkward flow, with Amanda continuing to hold court, now discussing her company's recent partnership with a celebrity fragrance line. I barely heard her, too focused on James's sudden tension and the mysterious team that was apparently on its way. About 15 minutes later, as my mother was serving coffee, the doorbell rang. My father went to answer it, and from the dining room, I heard multiple voices in the foyer. Not one person, but several. Richard, my father's voice carried back to us, sounding bewildered. There are some people here asking for James. 3 cars just pulled up. James stood, straightening his jacket. That would be my team. Thank you for your patience, everyone. This will only take a moment. We all turned toward the entryway as 5 people in impeccable business attire entered the dining room. 3 women and 2 men, all carrying sleek leather portfolios. The woman in front, a tall, striking figure with silver-streaked dark hair, stepped forward. Good evening, she said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone used to being listened to. I apologize for the interruption. I'm Catherine Westbrook, lead counsel for Elliston International. The room went completely still. Amanda's wineglass froze halfway to her lips. Catherine reached into her portfolio and began distributing business cards to everyone at the table. The distinctive Elliston logo, a stylized E with a diamond integrated into the design, was unmistakable at the top of each card. Mr. Rhodes asked us to join him this evening to address some concerns regarding an Elliston heritage piece, Catherine continued. Specifically, the authenticity of Miss Dania Williams's engagement ring. All eyes turned to James, who was now standing straight, his demeanor completely transformed. Gone was the quiet, private man I knew. In his place stood someone with unmistakable authority. For those who aren't aware, James said, his voice calm but commanding, my full name is James Rhodes. I am the founder and CEO of Elliston International. The silence that followed was absolute. Amanda's face drained of all color. My mother's hand flew to her throat. My father's mouth actually fell open. One of the other team members, a younger man in wire-rimmed glasses, stepped forward and opened his portfolio. We've brought documentation, confirming Mr. Rhodes's position including the company's most recent financial statements showing annual revenue of $3.2 billion and press materials from our last 5 collections. He placed the documents on the table where everyone could see them. The Elliston logo was prominent on every page, alongside photos of James at various industry events and gallery openings. Another team member approached me directly. "Miss Williams, may I see the ring, please?" Still in shock, I extended my hand. The woman examined the ring carefully, then nodded to Catherine. "This is indeed item E647 from the Elliston Heritage Collection," she confirmed. One of only 8 pieces created by Mr. Rhodes himself when he founded the company. The current market value is approximately $750,000, though as a historical piece from the founder's original designs, it's essentially priceless to collectors. A sound like a strangled gasp came from Amanda's direction. Somewhere across the table, silverware clattered against a plate. Catherine produced an elegant leather folder and opened it to reveal a certificate of authenticity with detailed photographs of my ring. This piece features a rare pink diamond of extraordinary clarity, set in 18-karat rose gold with platinum filigree work, all handcrafted using traditional techniques from the 1700s, she explained, her voice carrying easily in the dead silent room. It represents Mr. Rhodes's first exploration of combining historical craftsmanship with modern luxury that has become Elliston's signature style. All eyes darted between the documentation, my ring, and James, who stood calmly beside me, his hand now resting protectively on my shoulder. "I typically keep my professional life separate from my personal relationships," James explained to my stunned family. "I've found that people behave differently when they know who I am and what I've built. I value authenticity in my connections, which is why Dania didn't know the full extent of my work until recently." He looked down at me with a gentle smile. I wanted to be sure she was saying yes to me, not to Elliston. I was speechless, my mind racing to reconcile the James I knew with this revelation. Everything suddenly made sense. The travels, the privacy, the knowledge of craftsmanship and art. He hadn't been hiding something nefarious, but rather protecting something precious, our relationship. Amanda had gone completely rigid in her chair. The Elliston bracelet on her wrist, which she had been showing off so proudly earlier, now seemed to burn against her skin. I could see her desperately trying to recall exactly what she had said about Elliston, about knowing people there, about being able to recognize authentic pieces. Catherine turned her attention to Amanda, her professional smile unwavering but her eyes cold. "Miss Amanda Williams, I believe? We understand you've made several statements regarding this Elliston piece, calling it, and I quote, a cheap prop, and suggesting it was counterfeit. Is that correct?" My cousin Taylor, who had taken photos of the ring earlier, was now frantically tapping at her phone, presumably deleting those images before they could spread further. I was only, Amanda stammered, looking desperately around the table for support and finding none. The atmosphere in the dining room had completely transformed. Where minutes before there had been judgment and condescension directed at me and my ring, now there was shocked silence and the distinct feeling that the ground had shifted beneath everyone's feet. As Amanda struggled to find words, Catherine Westbrook continued with practiced precision. "Elliston International takes matters of authenticity very seriously," she said, opening another section of her portfolio. "We actively protect our brand reputation and the integrity of our pieces, particularly those from Mr. Rhodes's personal collections." The second male team member, who had introduced himself as Daniel Harrington, Director of Security for Elliston, stepped forward with yet another leather folder. "We've prepared some documentation outlining the legal implications of making false statements about Elliston products, particularly in public or social settings, where such statements could impact brand perception," he explained, his tone matter-of-fact but unmistakably serious. My mother found her voice first. "Surely that's not necessary," she said, looking anxiously between James and his team. "It was just a family dinner conversation, a misunderstanding." Catherine smiled politely. "We understand that, Mrs. Williams. However, given Miss Amanda Williams's stated connections to the luxury fashion industry and her claims of professional knowledge, her statements carry additional weight and potential liability. Amanda looked like she might faint. The famous Elliston bracelet on her wrist now seemed more like a shackle than a status symbol. "I didn't mean any harm," she whispered. "I was just joking around. Sister stuff, you know?" James had remained quiet during this exchange, his hand still resting supportively on my shoulder. Now he spoke, his voice gentle but firm. "I've kept my identity private for personal reasons," he explained to the table at large. When Dania and I met, I was immediately impressed by her passion for her work, her integrity, and her genuine appreciation for craftsmanship. She valued the art she restored based on its cultural significance and beauty, not its price tag. That's rare in my experience. He looked down at me, his eyes warm. I wanted to be sure that what was developing between us was real, not influenced by my company or position. One of the female team members, who had introduced herself as Elliston's head of public relations, opened yet another folder. "We've brought the complete documentation for the engagement ring, including its provenance, design sketches, and certification. As mentioned, this piece is one of only 8 from Mr. Comeuppance, Rhodes's founding collection, created when he established Elliston 15 years ago." She placed elegant documents on the table, including hand-drawn designs that were unmistakably in James's style. I recognized the careful precision of his lines from sketches he'd sometimes make while we watched movies at home. Each of these 8 pieces represents a milestone in Mr. Rhodes's vision for merging historical craftsmanship with contemporary luxury, she continued. "They're not available for public purchase at any price." The reality of the situation was slowly dawning on everyone in the room. The ring that Amanda had so publicly ridiculed was not only genuine but essentially priceless. James, whom she had insinuated might be taking advantage of me, was actually the founder and CEO of her favorite luxury brand, the very one she had been name-dropping and showing off throughout dinner. My father cleared his throat nervously. "James, we had no idea. Dania never mentioned." "Because Dania didn't know," James replied simply. "I only told her recently, and even then, not the full extent of the company's scope. I value my privacy, especially in personal relationships." Amanda suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I need to use the restroom," she muttered, her face ashen. "Before you go, Miss Williams," Catherine interjected smoothly, "there's the matter of your bracelet." Amanda froze, her eyes darting to the Elliston bracelet on her wrist. "You mentioned it's from our reserve collection," Catherine continued. "May I see it?" With trembling fingers, Amanda extended her arm. Catherine examined the bracelet briefly, then nodded to the PR director, who produced yet another document. "This appears to be from our spring collection 3 years ago," the PR director stated. "Not the reserve collection, which features a distinctly different clasp design and stone setting." Amanda's face flushed crimson. "Greg said it was reserve," she mumbled. "He must have been mistaken." "A common misunderstanding," Catherine said with professional courtesy, though her eyes remained cool. "The reserve collection is indeed limited to 75 pieces annually, but they're exclusively sold through our flagship stores and require personal appointment with our client directors." The implication was clear. Amanda had been exaggerating her connections and knowledge, possibly for years, to people who had no way of verifying her claims. Now, in one catastrophic evening, her carefully constructed facade was crumbling. As Amanda finally fled to the bathroom, I found my voice. "James," I said quietly, "why didn't you say something earlier? When she was making those comments about the ring?" James squeezed my shoulder gently. "I wanted to see how far it would go," he admitted. "I've encountered people like your sister throughout my career. People who use luxury brands as weapons, who see these objects not for their craftsmanship or beauty but as tools for establishing superiority over others." He glanced around at my family, most of whom had the good grace to look embarrassed. "When I heard how she spoke to you, not just tonight but in the stories you've told me over the years, I decided it was time to end the private approach. Some behaviors shouldn't go unchallenged." Daniel Harrington, the security director, cleared his throat. "Mr. Rhodes, should we proceed with the cease and desist documentation?" James looked at me questioningly. That's up to Dania, he said. This is her family. All eyes turned to me. In that moment, I felt a clarity I'd never experienced before, in my family's presence. Years of diminishment, of subtle and not so subtle put-downs, of having my achievements and choices dismissed, all culminating in tonight's public humiliation. And now, unexpectedly, the power to respond had been placed in my hands. I think, I said slowly, finding my voice growing stronger with each word, that formal documentation won't be necessary. I believe the message has been received. Catherine nodded, closing her portfolio. As you wish, Miss Williams. However, we'll leave our contact information should anything similar occur in the future. The implied threat hung in the air, clear to everyone present. This matter could be pursued legally if Amanda or anyone else continued to make false claims about Elliston products or, by extension, about me and my relationship. My mother, always the hostess even in crisis, pulled herself together first. Would anyone like more coffee? Or perhaps some dessert? We have a lovely tiramisu. Her attempt at normalcy fell flat in the charged atmosphere of the dining room. No one moved toward the dessert or coffee. Instead, all eyes remained fixed on James and his team, as if they might disappear, if not watched carefully. Amanda returned from the bathroom, her makeup freshly applied but unable to hide her humiliation. She slipped back into her seat without making eye contact with anyone. The silence stretched uncomfortably until James spoke again. I believe we've taken enough of everyone's time this evening. Dania, are you ready to go? The question was simple, but I understood its deeper meaning. Was I ready to walk away from this scene, head held high, with the truth now fully revealed? Was I ready to leave them all sitting there, processing what had just happened? Yes, I said, standing up and taking his hand. I think we've had enough family time for one evening. As we prepared to leave, James's team efficiently gathering their materials, I noticed the expressions on my relatives' faces. Shock, embarrassment, reassessment. I had moved in the span of an hour, from the family member to be pitied to someone connected to power and prestige. It was a strange feeling, unsettling, yet vindicating. Thank you for dinner, I said to my parents as we reached the door. It was certainly memorable. And with that, we left. James's team of legal and PR professionals filing out behind us, leaving my family in stunned silence with their coffee cooling and their perceptions permanently altered. The drive away from my parents' house began in silence. I stared out the window, processing everything that had happened, while James focused on the road. His team followed in their own vehicles, headlights visible in the rearview mirror. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, James finally said, breaking the silence. About Elliston. I turned to look at him. This man I thought I knew completely, who had just revealed an entire other dimension of himself. I understand why you didn't, I replied slowly, but bringing your legal team to my family dinner? That was unexpected. James grimaced slightly. I called them after I heard what Amanda was saying about the ring, about us. I wanted documentation on hand in case things escalated further. Things escalated all right, I said, a small laugh escaping despite myself. I don't think my family will ever be the same. We drove a bit further before James spoke again. Are you angry with me? I considered the question carefully. No, I finally said. Surprised, yes. A bit overwhelmed, definitely. But not angry. You protected yourself, your company's reputation, and ultimately, me. It's hard to be angry about that. I never wanted to deceive you, he said earnestly. When we first met, I was so refreshed by how you treated me as just another person, not as a CEO or a brand, just as James. Because that's who you are to me, I replied. Though I have to admit, watching Amanda's face when she realized who you were, that was priceless. We both laughed then, the tension breaking. By unspoken agreement, we decided to stop at a small coffee shop rather than going straight home. We needed neutral ground to continue this conversation. James's team respectfully remained outside as we found a quiet corner table. Over steaming mugs of tea, I asked the questions that had been swirling in my mind. Why Elliston? How did you build it? And why keep it so separate from your personal life? James traced the rim of his mug thoughtfully. I started as a craftsman, apprenticing with an old-world jeweler in Florence. I loved the work, the precision of it, the history. But I saw how traditional craftsmanship was being lost in mass production. He explained how he'd used a small inheritance to start Elliston, named after his grandmother, beginning with just 8 handcrafted pieces, including my ring. As the company grew, I found that people related to me differently. I wasn't James the craftsman anymore, I was James Rhodes of Elliston. People either wanted something from me or treated me like some kind of untouchable figure. I understood then why he had kept this part of himself hidden even from me. "It must be lonely sometimes," I said softly. "It was," he agreed. "Until I met you. You saw me for who I am beneath the company. Beneath the brand." We talked for hours, filling in the gaps of his story, connecting the James I knew with this new dimension. By the time we left the coffee shop, I felt I understood him more completely than ever before. When we arrived home, James's phone was buzzing constantly with messages. He checked it briefly and sighed. "Your family has been busy. Apparently, your cousin Taylor posted something on social media before deleting it. Several fashion blogs have already picked up the story that Elliston's founder is engaged." "I'm sorry," I said, wincing. "Family gossip travels fast." "It's all right," he replied, setting the phone aside. "It was bound to come out eventually." The next morning brought a flood of messages and calls from my family. My mother left 3 tearful voicemails, alternating between apologies and excitement about having such an important new family member. My father sent an awkward text asking if James might consider investing in his friend's startup. Most telling was the progression of messages from Amanda. The first, sent at 2 in the morning, was defensive and angry, accusing me of deliberately humiliating her by not revealing James's identity sooner. By 6 a.m., she had moved to bargaining, suggesting we put last night behind us and meet for brunch to talk about exciting collaborations between her marketing firm and Elliston. Her final message, sent just after 9, was a desperate attempt at reconciliation, claiming she had always believed in me and was just looking out for my best interests with her comments about the ring. I showed the messages to James, who raised his eyebrows but said nothing. The decision on how to respond was mine alone. After careful consideration, I decided not to respond immediately to any of them. Instead, I called my therapist and scheduled an emergency session. "I need help processing what happened," I explained to James, "and deciding which relationships are worth salvaging." Over the next few weeks, a new pattern emerged. My extended family, who had barely acknowledged my existence at previous gatherings, now found countless reasons to reach out. Invitations to lunch, requests for coffee dates, curious questions about wedding planning. The sudden interest in my life was transparent in its motivation. Through therapy, I began to see my family dynamics with new clarity. The constant diminishment I had experienced wasn't about me at all, but about their own insecurities and need for validation through external markers of success. Amanda continued her campaign for reconciliation, each message more desperate than the last. When I finally agreed to meet her, 6 weeks after the disastrous dinner, she arrived at the cafe already in tears. "I was horrible to you," she admitted immediately. "Not just at dinner, but for years. I don't expect you to forgive me." "Then why are you here?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Because you're my sister," she said, "and I don't want to lose you. Even if you never introduce me to James again, even if I never get to benefit from your connection to Elliston, I realize now what I've done." I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd grown so accustomed to. "What exactly do you think you've done, Amanda?" "I've been jealous of you," she confessed, the words seeming to physically pain her. "You've always known exactly who you are and what you love. You never needed external validation the way I do. I surrounded myself with luxury brands and name-dropping because I thought it made me special. You were special without any of that." Her words surprised me. I had always seen Amanda as supremely confident, never imagining she might envy anything about my life. "The irony," she continued, wiping at her tears, "is that you found someone like James precisely because you don't care about status or brands. And I never will, because that's all I care about." I didn't offer immediate forgiveness or reassurance. Instead, I set clear boundaries, If we're going to have any relationship moving forward, it needs to be built on mutual respect. No more backhanded compliments, no more diminishing my choices or career. I understand, she nodded earnestly. And James and Elliston are off limits as topics of conversation, I added firmly. I won't be your connection to the luxury world you're so obsessed with. Amanda agreed to my terms, though I remained cautious. Real change would take time to prove itself, if it happened at all. As our wedding planning began in earnest, James and I made decisions that reflected our values rather than social expectations. We chose a small, intimate ceremony in the sculpture garden of the museum where we met. The guest list was carefully considered, including only people who had shown genuine care for us as individuals. Amanda was not invited to the wedding, a decision that caused another round of family drama, but one I stood firm on. My parents attended, chastened by the experience at the dinner and making visible efforts to relate to me differently. Throughout this period, I continued my work at the museum. Despite now being engaged to a billionaire, I had no intention of giving up the career I'd worked so hard to build. James supported this completely, understanding that my passion for art restoration was integral to who I was. I fell in love with you partially because of how you talk about your work, he reminded me. The last thing I'd want is for you to give that up. We established new traditions to replace the toxic family gatherings I'd dreaded for years. Thanksgiving was spent serving meals at a local shelter. Christmas became a quiet celebration with the few family members who had earned their place in our lives, plus close friends who had been supportive long before anyone knew about James's company. Some relationships were rebuilt on healthier foundations. My younger cousin Taylor, after a sincere apology for her part in the dinner disaster, became someone I spoke with regularly. My Aunt Patricia, who had always been quietly kind even during family tensions, became a more prominent figure in our lives. As for Amanda, our relationship remained a work in progress. She was trying, in her way, to be less status-obsessed, though old habits died hard. I maintained firm boundaries, meeting her only in public places and keeping conversations away from anything Elliston-related. The transformation in my life wasn't about suddenly being connected to wealth or status. It was about finding the courage to expect and demand respect, to stop accepting diminishment as my due, and to recognize my own worth independent of others' validation. The months following the dramatic family dinner were a time of profound change and self-discovery. With each passing day, I grew more comfortable claiming my space, speaking my truth, and setting boundaries that protected my well-being. Our wedding day arrived on a perfect September morning, with golden light filtering through the trees of the sculpture garden. I wore a vintage-inspired dress that echoed the craftsmanship of my engagement ring, with hand-embroidered details and subtle beadwork that caught the light as I moved. James waited for me beside a bronze sculpture representing eternal connection, his eyes filling with tears as I approached. Only 30 guests witnessed our vows, each one carefully chosen for their genuine place in our lives. My mother sat in the front row, subdued but genuinely happy, having slowly earned her way back into my good graces through consistent respect and honest communication. My father, too, had made efforts to see me as a whole person rather than as an extension of himself or a disappointment to his expectations. Amanda's absence was noticeable but necessary. She had sent a simple card wishing us happiness, with no mention of Elliston or luxury brands, a small but significant sign of potential growth. After our honeymoon, a quiet 2 weeks exploring small artisan workshops in rural Italy, we returned to our normal lives. I continued my work at the museum, now with the freedom to take on only the most interesting restoration projects. James divided his time between Elliston's headquarters and a small workshop he had built in our home, where he occasionally created one-of-a-kind pieces just for the joy of craftsmanship. As Christmas approached, my phone began filling with the usual family messages about the annual gathering. This year, however, the tone was different, tentative, respectful, asking rather than assuming my attendance. "Are you thinking of going?" James asked as I showed him the messages. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Part of me wants to see if anything has really changed. Another part wonders if it's worth the emotional energy." After much consideration, we decided to make a brief appearance at my parents' home on Christmas Eve, setting clear time boundaries and having an exit strategy in place. When we arrived, I was immediately struck by the difference in atmosphere. Gone was the competitive undercurrent, the subtle jockeying for position and status. Instead, conversations felt more genuine, less performative. Several relatives approached me with sincere apologies for their behavior at the infamous dinner and the years of dismissal that had preceded it. Most surprising was Amanda's approach. She arrived without designer logos prominently displayed, wearing a simple black dress with minimal jewelry. When she greeted me, her usual air kiss was replaced with a genuine, if awkward, hug. "You look happy," she said simply. "It suits you." Throughout the evening, she made no mention of Elliston, asked no leading questions about James's business, and did not name-drop a single luxury brand or industry connection. When James was drawn into a conversation about craftsmanship by my uncle, Amanda deliberately moved to a different group rather than trying to insert herself. "She's really trying," I murmured to James later as we prepared to leave. "People can change when properly motivated," he replied. "The question is whether the change will stick when the motivation fades." That was the wisdom I carried forward into the new year and beyond. People could change, but lasting transformation required consistent effort and genuine desire. I remained cautiously optimistic about some family relationships while maintaining firm boundaries with others. My relationship with Amanda evolved slowly over the following years. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns resurfaced and had to be addressed directly. But there were also breakthroughs, instances of genuine connection, that had nothing to do with status or external validation. Perhaps the most profound change was within myself. The constant need for family approval, the deep-seated belief that I somehow deserved less respect or consideration than others, gradually dissolved. I began to recognize my own worth, not as something granted by others, but as inherent to my being. James and I created a home filled with things chosen for their beauty, craftsmanship, and meaning rather than their brand name or price tag. We supported artisans and craftspeople, using James's industry connections to help preserve traditional techniques in danger of being lost to mass production. On the anniversary of our engagement each year, James would add another piece to my collection from Elliston's heritage line, each one telling a story of craftsmanship and artistry, not for their monetary value, but for the history and meaning they carried. When my father's health began to fail 3 years after our wedding, I found myself spending more time with my parents, navigating the complex emotions of caring for someone who had often failed to see my true value. In those quiet hospital room conversations, my father finally spoke of his pride in my career, in the expertise I had built, in the person I had become. "I always thought success looked a certain way," he confessed one evening. "I never understood that what you were doing was extraordinary in its own right." These belated recognitions didn't erase the past hurts, but provided a foundation for healing and closure. When he passed, I grieved not just for the father I had, but for the relationship we might have had if mutual respect had come earlier. My mother, in her widowhood, revealed yet another dimension of possibility for change. Without my father's influence, she began to develop her own interests and perspectives. Our relationship deepened as she finally saw me clearly, without the distorting lens of comparison or expectation. Amanda, too, continued her halting progress toward authenticity. After losing her marketing position during a company restructuring, she faced a genuine identity crisis. Who was she without the trappings of luxury and status she had so carefully cultivated? When she called me during this difficult period, I chose compassion over resentment. Not forgetting the past, but not holding her prisoner to it either. "You're more than the brands you wear or the people you know," I told her. "You always have been. You just couldn't see it." Slowly, painfully, Amanda began building a life based on genuine interests and connections rather than appearances. She started a small consulting business helping artisans market their work ethically, occasionally collaborating with James on initiatives to support traditional craftsmanship. The journey wasn't linear or perfect. Old wounds sometimes reopened. Old patterns occasionally resurfaced. But the direction was clear, toward authenticity and away from the toxic dynamics that had defined our family for so long. As I reflect on the years since that fateful dinner when my engagement ring was called fake, I realized that the true value of that night wasn't in the vindication or the dramatic reversal of status. It was in the permission it gave me to expect more, to require better treatment, to stand firmly in my own worth. The ring on my finger, now accompanied by a simple wedding band James forged himself, remains a symbol not of luxury or status, but of authenticity and craftsmanship. Its true value lies not in its price tag, but in what it represents. A relationship built on seeing and appreciating what lies beneath the surface. If there's one lesson I've learned through all of this, it's that silence truly is golden. Not the silence of suppressing your truth or accepting diminishment, but the silence of letting actions speak louder than words, of allowing reality to reveal itself without fanfare or explanation. Sometimes the most powerful response isn't a defense or an argument, but simply allowing the truth to unfold in its own time. Like the careful restoration work I do at the museum, revealing the true beauty beneath years of accumulated darkness and neglect. The most meaningful transformations often happen quietly, layer by layer, bringing forward what was always there but hidden from view. Have you ever had a moment when staying silent was more powerful than speaking up? When the truth revealed itself without your intervention? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own worth. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that true value often lies beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to shine.